He showed basically water in a small grocery store and on the floor, and he goes, about to slip. And that was the headline or the hashtag of his social media, about to slip. And then he filed this slip and fall claim.
Welcome to the Self-Insurance Podcast, brought to you by CRMBC. Every week, we're interviewing industry experts, restaurant operators, and brokers to talk about the world of workers' comp self-insurance in California. Today, we're joined by Sam King, Vice President, SIU, and Program Management, Apex Investigations. Welcome, Sam.
Thank you.
So today, we're going to talk a little bit about workers' comp investigations and fraud. Before we do that, will you tell us a little bit about your background?
Yeah, I have several leadership positions, including in the insurance industry, as well as executive positions with national investigation firms. I've had over 10 years of law enforcement background. I've served as the chairman of the California Workers' Compensation Institute's Anti-Fraud Committee, as well as the California Department of Insurance SIU Training Committee. I hold a bachelor's degree. I'm a licensed private investigator. I have my certified fraud examiner certificate and my certified insurance fraud investigator certificate. I have a designation as an associate in claims as well.
Thank you for that. So from people in the, lay people in the world, it's got so much sexiness that you're, the private investigation side of things. And we think of the movies and things like this. And there's a very real part of workers' comp and running a workers' comp self-insured group that requires this investigation. Because although we'd like to think that we're there to help the injured worker and that no one's committing fraud, there's a large percentage of what we're dealing with that has to do with fraud and how we address that to protect our members and to protect our members' money and to protect the whole system. So there's basically 4 categories of workers' comp fraud. Can you talk to us a little bit about what those are?
Yeah. When it comes to claimant fraud, there's 4 primary categories that we look at. One is a pre-existing medical history, and it's typically when they're lying about a prior claim history and injuries and body parts. Another is the injury did not arise out of employment or occur in the course of employment. The injury occurred outside of work. So that's an area of fraud. And then working while collecting benefits is another one that we see quite often. And that's where the injured worker starts working at some point and is still collecting total temporary disability. And then the 4th one is malingering. And it's really, that typically is a legitimate work comp injury, but the injured worker exaggerates their symptoms and their limitations so they can't go back to work.
Got it. And so we talked about there's basically investigation options for minor injuries, significant, subjective complaints, and slow recovery. Let's walk through those one by one. What are the investigation options for a claimant with a minor injury?
Typically there's a couple of options. One is to do a social media investigation. That may show evidence of physical activity or working activities inconsistent with the actual claim being presented. Another one would be surveillance, where you actually do undercover filming. It's the same as a social media investigation as far as what you're looking for, but it's more solid, more reliable, and more acceptable when it comes to trying to change a medical opinion with a doctor or developing and presenting an SIU case to law enforcement.
And then what additional options when you get to significant subjective complaints?
It's really, those 2 are the main ones. And then from there, you can go into trying to find out what information you actually have from the employer or from witnesses, what they might be doing. Sometimes if you look at someone that presents a claim and then they are presenting something fraudulent, then what happens in that scenario is that, that information is usually there's a tip, there's an anonymous tip, there's somebody in the employment environment or somebody that knows the person. Those are great leads for us to get information so that we can effectively do surveillance. Social media investigations is kind of a prelude. It's a precursor sometimes to telling us that we need to do a surveillance investigation. I think surveillance is probably one of the key tools to help us. We may have to do a claim investigation where we actually take statements and find out what they're saying their medical history is in that scenario. We're going to pull all the tools out of our arsenal to try to go after this and really tailor the investigation need.
What are the key elements that you have to get in an investigation to support a criminal prosecution?
And there's 4 key elements that we have to prove. And this is when we develop what we call a documented fraud referral, or we're documenting and presenting to a prosecutor why we believe there's fraud. And I like to use an acronym MILK, and it's milk with a big L. It all starts with a lie. So that's the L. We'll start there, but it starts with a lie, but the lie has to be material. So if I say that I have an 800-year-old grandmother in a deposition, that might be a lie, but if it's not material, it's not going to have any effect whatsoever. So it's got to be material to the claim. And then secondly, it's got to be intentionally made. Proving intent is in a pretty easy area because we can show intent oftentimes by the fact they would get more money, they get more time off, they would have gotten a benefit of some sort that they were not entitled to. And then the L is the lie. The lie is the fraud when you think about it that way. If we have more than one count of fraud, that simply means we have more than one lie that we're looking at. And then the last area is knowledge. They have to have knowledge that what they're doing is wrong. And they have to be, if you think about it, a lot of our workers' compensation claim forms, the very first forms we start with in the system, they all have a reminder that it's a felony to commit workers' compensation fraud. And so that's an important area where we're actually giving them knowledge that it's wrong at the very beginning. So you got milk, you got fraud. That's an acronym you can use.
So how prevalent is this? How busy are you guys? How much fraud are you seeing daily? And we're specifically in California, so let's speak to that. How much, I don't know how do you quantify it, or I'm sure you have an idea, but tell me how prevalent this is.
It happens every day. It's hard to quantify in the sense of, there's a lot of numbers out there that basically say the fraud is 10 to 20% of all claims have an element of fraud. That's probably true from what we see. I mean, we get the claims when they're highly suspicious for some, there's an indicator of fraud of some sort. And then we turn around and we begin to investigate and we find out if there's fraud or there's not fraud. And typically, if we're able to put together evidence of fraud, then we can pursue a criminal case. And that's what I do in the SIU, or the Special Investigative Unit.
Okay, so let's say you guys got the great surveillance video. Then what do you do with it next?
Getting great video is great. That's an important thing, but that's one of the problems that we see. We try to guide the claim handlers and people in the work comp system. You don't want to you need to do something with the film if you've got good film. And the first thing is, you need to look at, is the film inconsistent with what the, primary treating physician is stating, or in a statement or deposition that was occurred, is it different activity? And if it is, that's great. We also look at, will the film potentially assist in negotiating a reduced settlement or a reduction in permanent disability, work restrictions, or change in medical opinion? That's great as well. Is there enough film where the employee or the claimant can argue that it was just a good day? That happens sometimes. Sometimes we'll recommend that let's do another day just so that we can defeat the good day, bad day defense. It's basically what you want to do to develop a fraud case. We have to have a lie. And we talked about that earlier. Typically, we want to do a deposition or a statement if they're not represented after we get good surveillance film, because we don't want to give up the film. And the good news is in California, we have case law that helps us. We don't have to give up the film until after we've had the opportunity to take a statement or take a deposition of the claimant. And after that, we want to give the film up to the applicant attorney, and we want to give the film up to a qualified medical examiner and the primary treating physician. We want to give everybody the film and want them to comment on the film and look at the film in relationship to the medical restrictions that have been prescribed.
Are there certain tips or certain things that happen at the beginning of the claim that trigger them getting you involved? Yeah,
I think we refer to a lot of those areas as red flags. where there's indicators of fraud that come up. And so there are a ton of indicators of fraud that we look at. And so I think that typically when you're handling a claim, the claim examiner is looking at the case and they're looking at, how long has this person been off? Let's say they have a back injury where there's subjective complaints, but there's no evidence of a back injury when it comes to diagnostics that have been done. In that situation, after about 4 or 5 weeks being off work, there's questions that need to be asked. Why are we not seeing any diagnostic issues there? All the diagnostics are showing that there's no problem. That's an indicator of malingering. And at that point, we may want to really look at doing a social media investigation and or a surveillance investigation.
Can you give us some more red flags?
Yeah, I've got quite a few actually. But, some of the red flags are simple. Some of them are more difficult that you really have to think about. One of them is just a claimant having serious financial problems. If you know they're having serious financial problems before they file the claim, that may be the reason they're filing the claim. In those situations, a claimant may turn around and get another job and actually be working another job while they're collecting temporary disability and getting 2 incomes. Another one is they simply, you can never get a hold of them at home. You try to call them and you hear funny things in the background, like maybe they're not at home. And if they're supposed to be on temporary total disability, they should be at home and recovering and taking medication, following the doctor's orders, not out doing things or working another job. And you might even hear them working in another job, when you call them. There's some that I think a red flag is if they file a claim after they've been terminated from work, that can be a major red flag. That could be a retaliation claim. And we see those quite often. A claimant files a claim after they receive a disciplinary action of some sort, personnel action. That's a frequent one as well. They're frequently change physicians in order to avoid returning to work. So as soon as one physician says they can return to work, all of a sudden they go to another physician or they get represented by an attorney. Those are all red flags of potential malingering.
That's really helpful. Thank you for breaking those down for me. Can you explain to us how social media can be used to expose fraud?
Yeah, it's amazing. We started looking at, people don't realize oftentimes that their social media, they have it on public record, and most people keep their social media open to the public. So we're able to legally get information on social media investigations quite often. And we'll see some interesting things. I mean, we had one case we did not too long ago that basically showed a slip and fall injury, but this guy put on social media prior to the claim that he showed water in a small grocery store and on the floor, and he goes, about to slip. And that was the headline or the hashtag of his social media, about to slip. And then he did. He filed this. Another one, we had a Los Angeles area warehouse worker who claimed a back injury prevented him from working. And he posted that he bowled a perfect game on his Facebook page. He said, good game, but it was a bad idea. Because the bottom line is, that is something that's very helpful. Now we may want to do surveillance after that, but and really get more investigation. One of the things we do with social media investigations is we keep what they call the metadata, so that it can be used in court. The problem we have though with social media investigations is that are they not being truthful? And sometimes it can be challenged, or maybe they'll say, I posted that as a joke, or I posted that as just because I didn't realize what was going to happen. And I just wanted to be funny. So, and it could be an old picture, you might say it's an old picture. So, there's some defenses there. That is why we actually recommend surveillance after we find this information. Or we had a judo instructor that filed for a total permanent disability injury and later posted dates he was available to teach class and do instruction. One of the ones that was kind of notorious, was prosecuted criminally, was a Bronco riding champ filed a claim. And then soon after, he was online with his buddies attending an upcoming competition. and he was actually, riding Broncos again. It's pretty amazing some of the things that happen. And, when you start drilling down into the criminality of workers' compensation fraud.
Wow. Is there anything that employers, because we're obviously a workers' comp self-insured group for restaurant owners, is there anything that the employers can do that helps you, that you wish that they had done ahead of time, or that they can help during the investigation?
Well, the first thing is report if you have a potential injury, or even if you're not sure, report it right away. If it's a first aid injury, it won't count against you. So report it right away. That's important. And then secondly, we want to be able to investigate things right away. And if we don't have the claim until you've known about it for 30 days, that's going to be problematic. Another thing is it's a good thing to have video cameras at work, in work areas, so that we can document things. And you're allowed to do that in your workplace. And it's a very good thing because it does help us defeat claims. So I recommend video cameras are so much cheaper than they used to be. And it's a great tool to use and have in the work environment. And then another thing is, treat the employee good. I mean, I always tell people this, people don't leave the employer. They typically leave their direct boss. So if they don't like their direct boss, that could be a reason to file a fraudulent claim to try to get out of work. So if you see somebody in a management role that is not treating their employees well, you need to address that. And I think it'll really help you with curbing some of your claims. You probably won't get those claims if you address that.
Sam, this was incredibly enlightening. I really appreciate you coming on and talking about this. And I appreciate what you're doing for our industry. It's so important. And obviously, we're always looking for how we can keep our costs down. And you guys are a big piece of that. Thank you so much for your time today. Thank you for joining us for the Self-Insurance Podcast, brought to you by CRMBC. If there's a topic you'd like to learn more about, or if you have any questions, just email us at info@crmbc.com. Remember to subscribe, like, comment, and share, and join us again next time for more tips on self-insurance.